This is my third update as Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown musician in residence. This week I'm going to give an update on the composition I'm composing, Dún Laoghaire Guitars, and I'm also going to chat a bit about my next playlist, which is about some guitarists I would have listened to a lot when I was kind of in my mid-teens and mid to late teens in the 90s. So the progress update on the piece of music. Last week I went over a chord progression that I'd come up with for the piece, along with the rhythm. So I've added more chords. I have another section to the piece. So last week I showed you what would be considered like the A and the B part of the piece, and so now into the C part, the chords are like this. And so when put to the rhythm, so those chords are again similar kind of extended harmony chords like in the previous chords I showed you last week. This is an A major 7. This is kind of a B7 with a suspended sound, which you get by keeping the B and the E strings open without fretting them. And then this is kind of an F sharp minor chord with a C sharp in the bass, and then you add the open string. So all these kind of chords have quite a dreamy kind of sound, I would describe it as, and by using these open strings you get that. Get a rolling sound, a bit like a train, and I guess this movement might be inspired by the Dún Laoghaire Dart station, which I would have gone to a lot. I was on the Dart a lot as a kid and a teenager, so that's the basic kind of chords. So I've also put a bass line to it, which I've sent to Kieran for him to send to his students, and the bass line is aimed at the kind of intermediate level players. It's the more simple part of the piece. When you're composing a piece of music for different levels of players, you have to cater some parts to the less advanced players. So that's what the bass line is. And so the basic bass line style is. I can try and put that together with the chords, the rhythm, to give you a sense of what it will be like together. So. Etc. And when we get to this chord progression, I've got the bass kind of more this kind of a sound goes with it, so it's nobody in playing in the piece will be playing exactly what I played there. That's just me trying to put together the bass line with the chords. So that's my update on the piece so far. I've more parts added to it, but that's enough, I think, to go on for this week. So now on to the playlist, and this is about music I listened to when I was about 15, 16, 17, that kind of age group. Around that stage, I'd kind of moved away a bit from heavy metal that I'd been listening to before. And we're talking about kind of 1993, 94, 95, that kind of period. And that was a kind of a strange time, I felt, for music. It was there was kind of a big retro culture, and the music, that the kind of guitar bands that were around at the time, I didn't think they were very original, most of them. They they were kind of using a lot of influences from the 60s and the 70s, and so there was a big culture at the time of remastering albums and bringing out, reviving bands from the 60s and 70s, and so in some ways that was great for me because I learned about, I was exposed to some great artists like Jimi Hendrix, Pink Floyd, Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, bands and other bands like the Beatles, who I hadn't really listened to much of up until then, had a huge revival then. So I learned a lot at that time from those bands. So the kind of guitar heroes for me in the 90s were not 90s guitarists. The main kind of rock guitar style in that kind of period was grunge, and I liked grunge for a while, but it's not particularly interesting for a guitarist, I think, because it's like, if you look at the Nirvana, their biggest hit, "Smells Like Teen Spirit," it's it's a great pop song, but it's very simple, so it doesn't inspire me as a guitar player, and a lot of grunge was like that. It was a passing kind of fad, I think, and you don't really hear much from grunge bands anymore, and only really Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden are kind of still heard on the radio. So I didn't get much out of grunge, and so then I was listening instead to Jimi Hendrix, who's on the playlist, who is, you can't have a Guitar Hero playlist without him, one of the greatest ever. And but then, like, some other guitarists I have on the playlist from this kind of retro revival period that I heard, they're kind of underrated and not really known as great guitar heroes outside of maybe musicians. And my favourite is probably Andy Summers from The Police. And I learned an awful lot from him, because when you hear the Police and the guitar parts, they seem quite simple when you hear them, but actually then if you look at his hands when he's playing, he's often really stretched out like this, saying "Message in a Bottle." Those are called add-9 chords. And he kind of invented this style of playing, which was hugely influential in the 80s, and he added effects like echoey delay effects and chorus and compression to get a really distinctive sound that was really copied by lots and lots of people, and is still copied by a lot of rock musicians and pop musicians today. So he was hugely influential, and he didn't just do that kind of a thing. Like he had a bit of classical training and some jazz training. One thing he did was artificial harmonics, which he probably got from his classical training. So harmonics are this kind of sound on the guitar. They're natural harmonics, where you just pluck the string. You don't put your finger down fully on the fretboard, you kind of lightly touch the string and then pluck it, and you get those bell-like sounds. But if you want to recreate that on other notes, you can fret here and have this kind of a technique. And Andy Summers did that. And he has this song, "When the World is Running Down, You Make the Best of What's Still Around," where the chords, again, they're not conventional rock chords at all. They're more, you might find them in jazz more commonly, but he does like kind of a thing, and he adds effects to make it more interesting and texturally kind of interesting. So he was a huge influence on me. He also did classical kind of things like this. This is Bring On the Night. And then one of my favorite pieces is the do 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 da da da, where that again, that this is like that chord that he uses in Message in a Bottle and Every Breath You Take. He has a simpler way of playing it up here for the do 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 da 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 da. So and then E add 9 chord. Doing a bass line and a kind of a hook kind of riff there as well, which I really like. So Andy Summers was such a big influence on me, opened my mind to all sorts of types of music, and I wrote a piece in tribute to him around the time. It was my first classical guitar piece, I'd say, and it uses that chord. A lot of those kind of chords are in it. That's how it starts, and at the end of this update, I have a video of me playing that piece. So that's Andy Summers, and then before Andy Summers, there's Robbie Krieger from The Doors, who was kind of a similarly versatile guitarist who had some classical and flamenco training and learned a bit. You know, he played a bit of jazz and all that, and also blues. And so in the 90s, I got into The Doors. They had a big revival because there was a big movie, The Doors, and so all their music was kind of on the radio, and I got to like it. And Robbie Krieger is a brilliant guitarist and kind of a bit underrated, I'd say. They have a piece called Spanish Caravan, which is based on flamenco and Spanish guitar, and even uses part of a famous piece by the composer Albéniz called Asturias. But here's kind of, I'll give it a go. Etc. etc. That bit there is the Albéniz Asturias, and I used to play that a lot when I was younger. I don't really play it anymore. So that's the kind of thing Robbie Krieger did, and so he was very advanced kind of for a rock guitarist, and you have to have classical or flamenco training to be able to play that kind of a thing. Then Paul Simon, another underrated guitarist, great guitarist who I got to appreciate when I was around that age, and he was famous for his kind of folky finger picking style, like in Feeling Groovy. It's great kind of introduction to learning how to play two things at once. There's a bass line there. And then there's the melody, so when you put them together. And so that kind of leads you, that kind of learning that kind of thing helps you when you go into playing classical music then. And then he had a beautiful song called So Long Frank Lloyd Wright in honour of a great architect, and he uses the Brazilian kind of style known as bossa nova in this, and this would be my first time hearing bossa nova, and I eventually got to really love the style, but that's... Neil Young and David Gilmour again from Pink Floyd. So I listened to a lot of them, and the Beatles at the time. I don't really need to go into them. They're so well known, and their guitar playing is kind of renowned. Maybe not so much the Beatles, but I learned a lot from the Beatles, like their chord progressions, like in Michelle. They call that chromatic movement. That's a technical musical term for when the notes go down like that. And Strawberry Fields Forever, which I have on the playlist, has the same kind of progression. Interesting thing about the Beatles was that George Harrison, Paul McCartney and John Lennon all played guitar on some of their recordings, and on Strawberry Fields Forever all three of them play guitar lines on it, and same with the song The End, where they trade guitar solos, which is great fun. Then you've got Yes on the playlist. They were a prog rock band. Again, all these artists had revivals in the 90s with reissues, and Yes were one of them, and their guitarist Steve Howe was another really versatile guitarist who played classical style, ragtime, finger picking, and jazzy stuff, and rock stuff, and folky stuff. Really, probably the most versatile rock guitarist there is. And they have a song called Starship Trooper, which is quite a classical picking kind of thing. I also have The Clash there, because they had a revival in the 90s thanks to being on an ad, and their main guitarist Mick Jones, he's not a flashy player at all. But he's really tasteful kind of guitar player for the kind of songs they're doing. Some of them are punk songs, but then they were more diverse than that. They funky kind of pop songs and reggae, and I love the song Straight to Hell, which is kind of, the guitar lines on it are very subtle and angular, and just a very tasteful guitarist. Then Joni Mitchell, again, I got to learn about her music at that period, and especially her album Hejira, which I love that album. It's quite a jazz influenced album, but she's very inventive guitar tunings. So I have to retune this guitar to show you how she did it. She would tune the guitar to get a sound she wanted, rather than stretch her hands all over the place. So to get similar chords like the Andy Summers would by stretching his hand, she was doing this before Andy Summers doing these kind of chords, but that was an E string, the E note tune, and she tunes it down to C. And then what's normally an A note, she tunes it down to a G. She keeps the D string as the D. And then what's normally a G, she tunes down to an F. And then normally a B goes up to a C. E string, she keeps that there. Bear in mind, this is just for one song. Should change tuning for so many different songs, but this is for Coyote, the song Coyote. It takes a while to get these tunings in tune. Basically playing what would normally be an A chord here. totally different sound from doing that. And then she has a song, Hejira, the title track of the album, where it's similar. These four strings are the same, but then she retunes these two. What was a C goes down to a G, very low down. And then this. Goes down to a C. Make it easy for anyone to copy her. So this is like how Hejira goes. So it's a beautiful kind of sound, unique kind of way of playing that she had. And in later years I would start experimenting a bit with all these kind of open tunings, and I came up with my own way of playing traditional music with my own kind of tunings. And so people like Joni Mitchell would have inspired me along the way for that. So that's my update, and the playlist, as I said, you can see it on the description below. You can click on, there's a YouTube playlist and a Spotify playlist, and also my blog, daveflynn.com. If you go there and click on blog, you'll see me writing a bit more about the playlist and the influence each musician had on me. And so I'll end with there's a video now of me playing my Homage to Andy Summers, which I later renamed as in honour of my late mum, a piece called Elegy for Joan.